Hey everybody, how are we feeling tonight? That was pretty good. I know you've been outside, you've been marching, you've been doing a lot of stuff today. Really, how are you feeling tonight? Make them hear you up there. What a beautiful gathering, and I'm so excited to be here in Ottawa joining all of you as you conclude another successful March for Life here in Canada, standing up for what I believe to be the greatest human rights atrocity ever in all of human history, but certainly within our generation's lifetime. If you're not very familiar with who I am or my content and what I do every day, my name is Isabel, and I am a 25-year-old, almost 26 this month. It goes very fast as soon as you graduate from college, trust me. Year-old content creator independently. So every single day I have the opportunity to do all kinds of stuff and wear many different hats in telling people the truth, whether that's a 15-second TikTok video or the 2-hour live stream that I host every day for Gen Zers all across the world, many of whom tune in every day from right here in Canada. I have a chance to travel the country and world and speak to organizations and groups just like this one, represent Generation Z and our unique cultural identity on international news and in the media. I write books and have a new one coming out next year about our generation and so many other things. But really what I get to do every day is get up and tell people the truth about a whole host of different subjects, abortion being one of the most important topics I have the opportunity to speak on every day. And if you had asked me a few years ago, when I was your age in high school or during my university years, if I ever could have predicted I would be standing on a stage like this in Ottawa, Canada today, talking about abortion or gender theory or the attack on freedom of expression or religion around the world, I would have thought that you were insane. I never planned on working in public speaking or in content creation or have any real interest in politics as a career outside of being the really nerdy captain of the speech and debate team in high school. In reality, my dream was to become a trauma surgeon. So I pursued my degree in biomedical sciences first at Colorado State University and later my master's in biomedical sciences policy and advocacy at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I loved science, and I still do, because I love the pursuit of objective truth. I love that science has given us the capacity to ask the biggest questions about the most fundamental realities in our universe, and we've been able to parse through these questions to find what we know to be true versus what we know to be false, what we know to be reality versus what we know to be fantasy. And I found myself wanting to put that use of pursuing objective truth into practice by helping people as a physician during my pre-medical education, only to find that science, especially in academia and all across the world today, as we've now discovered in the era of COVID-19, where the science means just about jack squat, that science really doesn't mean the pursuit of objective truth anymore. Science and truth as we know it has really turned into following along with whatever the loudest voices and the people in power want you to say, believe, think, or do on a day-by-day basis. On my college campus, I spent months, for example, learning about every tiny miracle that has to take place during fetal development, the impossible chances for a child to even make it to 9 months in the womb and be birthed as a beautiful, genetically unique human life throughout that process, only to be told months later that, yeah, abortion, though, it's not actually ending that genetically unique human life. It's not really even just a person, it's a clump of cells, despite all of those drawings of anatomy that we made you memorize. Ignore that, because in reality, when you go to medical school and become a doctor in America, you probably are going to be forced to participate in the abortion industry, whether you like it or not. We spent months learning about chromosomes and how a male's brain structure or body mass or bone density or muscle mass is fundamentally different from that of a woman. Not that that was a bad thing, just that that was a biological reality, only to be told that, yeah, though, actually, gender, that's not a real thing, not anymore. It's just a spectrum. It's something that you can choose on a day-by-day given basis, not a scientific reality that we've known and studied for thousands upon thousands of years. Heck, in many of my classes, I spent much more time arguing about why we should never have a border wall in the United States, or why the First Amendment, which guarantees our freedom of expression and speech and assembly and freedom to worship in America, was outdated and needed to be rewritten and just thrown out with the entirety of the US Constitution. In classes like anatomy and cellular biology and organic chemistry, which is terrible, by the way. Any OChem survivors in the house? A handful, maybe. Yes, I see you. I had to take it 3 times, so there's no shame in knowing that OChem is absolutely terrible. But I spent much more time in those classes arguing about my professor's political affiliation, or what they believed should be the role of the US Constitution, than that pursuit of objective truth to begin with. As a Christian scientist myself, which I certainly do not believe is mutually exclusive whatsoever, most great scientists have embraced faith through their big questions about the universe. I was even shocked to discover on one of my exams that a multiple choice question asked me what the origins of the universe were. And the correct answer choice was everything spontaneously erupted from a single cell millions of years ago. We don't really know how it happened, it just happened. And you would actually lose points on an exam to say that God was the creator of the universe. That was a wrong answer choice on my public college campus in Colorado. It may surprise you, perhaps not, that I've never really been one to just sit down and shut up when I'm frustrated that values aren't being represented, or more importantly, truth isn't being represented, especially in an academic setting. So I decided to do something about it. Once I got tired of raising my hand in class or getting failing grades on tests or papers because I challenged the status quo, I ran for student government. I started a conservative political organization, Turning Point USA, with a chapter on my college campus, got involved with Students for Life of America, which is one of our United States' most prominent leading youth voices for the pro-life movement in the United States. And if I thought that I felt isolated and alone on a sea of 33,000 students before, I was just about to find out how bad things could get. Almost immediately, I became singled out as that radical conservative girl at Colorado State University, a cowboy town with an agriculture program at my university, or country music often reigns king, probably the last place that I ever expected I would be attacked. I expected that much more so down the road in Boulder, the Berkeley of Colorado, if you will, but suddenly found myself really on the front lines of what we are now calling a culture war in the United States of America. Almost instantaneously, countless friends walked out of my life. Professors refused to work with me in research settings. I was formally reprimanded at my job as a university admissions officer that would give tours to people who were interested in coming to my university because I dared to refer to a group of people as "you guys." How dare I do that when I wasn't sure everyone in the group identified as a guy? Never mind that it was 2 female employees who were my supervisors that wrote me up for that and made it much more difficult to get jobs later on in college. I was labeled as xenophobic, a white supremacist, Nazi Barbie, I got quite frequently on my campus. Hitler Youth Captain, that was a new one, a bit creative, we have to give him that. Transphobic, homophobic, just everything phobic, right? Scared of everything. And my personal favorite, anti-woman. I was a misogynist and I hated women, according to men who were always telling me that. And I thought, no uterus, no opinion, right? Except actually men can probably have uteruses now, so the rules just keep changing every single day. But I was vehemently hated, persecuted, cast aside. People started putting up pictures with my face all over campus because I was the evil, racist, woman-hating, transphobic, homophobic girl who just believed in free speech and wanted to protect innocent children in the womb on campus that needed to be educated about what our values should be. and it escalated further from there. I literally wrote the book on how crazy my college experience was, which was so wonderfully mentioned in the introduction tonight. So if you want more of the story, there's a lot out there with my book called Frontlines. But things escalated to a point that I never saw coming, to make a long story short. I suddenly found myself on the receiving end of threats of violence, people threatening to rape me that I knew on my college campus, people threatening to kill me and shoot me, including someone that I worked with in our student government office and saw every day saying, "Isabel is an effing Nazi, and how many more people have to die before we realize all Nazis deserve to be effing shot?" It was a scary time, and the university police department decided my safety was of serious concern. They followed me around to my classes for a few weeks when things were really terrible. The address to my one-bedroom apartment where I lived alone just off campus was doxed online or posted without my permission, and I felt the need to go seek out a concealed carry permit the minute I turned 21, which incredibly I was fortunate enough to have access to, including campus carry, to keep myself safe in Colorado in the United States, as the complete assault on not just conservative or traditional or religious or pro-life values started to ramp up in America, but truly an assault on objective truth was ramping up on my college campus in Colorado, and now has become completely mainstream in the US and around the world, in almost every country you can imagine, which is the conversations that I'm so fortunate to have on my live stream every day now as a content creator. That assault on objective truth means that today, in 2023, the world that we live in is fundamentally different from the world that our parents and grandparents experienced when they were exactly our same age. Are there any fans of Netflix's Stranger Things in the house? A handful. I love Stranger Things. You'll know I'm like the world's biggest nerd. But nerd culture is mainstream now, so it's acceptable. It's fine. Also, I'm just really upset that we are now having to wait until 2025 for the next season of Stranger Things, but I'll save it for a comment on social media to Netflix, okay? But I always like to say when I'm speaking to organizations, or if I was speaking across the hall to a generally older audience at events just like this one, that when we're talking about a culture war, not just who's running for prime minister, who's running for president, who's in charge in parliament, who has the loudest voice in the media or our entertainment industry, we're talking about something so much bigger than that, like the people that we date, or our gender and where we can go to the bathroom, or what a family might look like for us if family even still exists in our lifetime. We're talking about the most basic reality of how we live and how we interact with one another and how we articulate our values. I always like to remind people who like to point the finger at Generation Z and say, we're the generation that's destroying humanity. I don't know if they say that much up here in your country, but in America, Gen Z is doomsday. It's the end of all that is good and holy and wonderful in America, according to the louder, older people who are involved in social activism. To the contrary is the truth, though. And in 2023, I like to remind those people that we are living in the upside down, a lot like Stranger Things. We are living in a time that looks kind of similar to what our parents and grandparents experienced at our age. It feels kind of similar to what we hear the stories our parents and grandparents tell us around the Thanksgiving dinner table, or at holidays, or when we come back and visit them from college on breaks. It feels like it's supposed to be the same, but it's not. Up has become down, and down has become up. Left has become right, and right is left. Right is wrong, and wrong is right. Lies have become truth, and truth have become lies. Men are women, and women are men. All of a sudden, you are a better person if you want to encourage a 12-year-old girl to experience menopause before she goes through puberty because someone convinced her that she should no longer embrace her gender. In America today, we're starting to follow the lead of your country and propose legislation that would allow children to be taken away from their parents, and their parents lose custody if they don't agree their child should go through gender transition surgery, or hormone therapy, even without a formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria. We live in a time where you are a crazy, radical, white supremacist nationalist if you want to get married and have kids someday. Which, by the way, you shouldn't want anyway, because kids, those are horrible for the environment. And they're going to ruin all of our opportunities to save the world from climate change, all told to us from people who fly on private jets all over the world to attend the most elite summits of all time. I could go example by example by example, even outside of this issue of our pro-life cause that we fight for every day, although I should be careful because your freedom of expression and freedom of speech is not quite as liberal as I experience back at home, so we'll rein it back in. I know hate speech is illegal here, and I'm just a really scary, hateful girl, okay? But if we really look at the upside down, I think our generation wants a return to something recognizable. We have this sense of nostalgia for a time that we can't even remember. I'm the oldest of us in Gen Z. On TikTok, you refer to me as the older Gen Zers, like those born in the 1900s. And I feel 1,000 years old every time you say that, so thank you, especially as like an almost married lady. I just feel ancient. So there is that. But I was born in 1997, and I remember some things about the 90s and the early 2000s that many of you probably don't remember at all. When was the latest any of you were born, out of curiosity? Who thinks they're the youngest here? 2004? Anybody younger than 2004? 2007? Oh, this is hard. This is what our parents talk about. Anybody after 2007? 8? 2008? 2010? Okay, this is amazing. I'm really glad you guys are here. I remember things that you don't even remember, but universally, as a generation, we have this longing for a time like the 1990s, right? Where it didn't seem like everything was so polarizing and so confusing and so hateful and angry all the time. I think that's why we love to binge rewatch seasons of Friends and Seinfeld, and we have this longing for something that just feels solid and reliable, and that is that foundation of objective truth, where we know something has been proven to be real versus something that has been proven to be false. We're tired as a generation across the world of living a lie, and we're starting to speak our minds because of it. Looking at the big picture of it all, of this living in the upside down and the attack on objective truth, I genuinely believe that our completely upside down culture is what it is today because of the first most powerful lie that we began to believe as a society instead of the truth. And that is the lie that preborn children, babies, the most innocent among us, the people who don't even have a voice to advocate for themselves, are not human beings. They're just clumps of cells. And, shockingly, that they deserve the death penalty for being an inconvenience to us or for a crime that they did not commit. This lie has not only transformed the culture of where I come from, south of you in the United States, but every country around the world, and has led to the single greatest human rights atrocity and the single greatest genocide, killing of human beings in all of human history. Here in Canada, in 1988, your Canadian government forever changed the culture of your beautiful country by removing all legal restrictions against abortion. And currently, today, in 2023, Canada is the only Western nation with zero legal protections for the preborn. The only one. Meaning, abortion is permitted for any reason whatsoever up until the very moment of birth, or frighteningly, no reason whatsoever up until the moment of birth. Abortion has become completely normalized in modern Canadian society to the point that 20% of all pregnancies in your country today are ending in abortion. 1 in 5 pregnancies. Look around to the young women in this room. Chances are, statistically, somebody that you're looking at knows somebody who has experienced this themselves, or maybe you yourself have experienced this, and I'm glad that you are here to be reminded that there is life and hope after the tragedy of abortion. 100,000 children each year in Canada are killed in their mother's wombs because of abortion. 100,000. For the record, that's double the number of total deaths in your country ever from COVID. And you don't see a public health emergency being declared, or people triple masking, or locking down their homes, or refusing to engage with people, or shutting down businesses and schools and churches because of the massive loss of life from abortion every year in Canada, do you? By the way, a lot more masks up here than down in America. Any progress on that front? Any hope that we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel? We're working on it. We'll get you guys there, I promise. It feels hopeless, and we share that feeling of hopelessness. We have for many, many decades in the United States, particularly since our Supreme Court essentially did the same thing that your government did in 1988. Ours was a bit earlier, in the 70s, with the decision of Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court, which essentially made that exact same declaration that abortion was somehow this ambiguous constitutional right that no one can point to in the Constitution. And we shared that feeling of overwhelming devastation from the impact of the abortion industry for so long in America, to the point that I think genuinely the vast majority of our population and our culture truly never thought that we would see a time that Roe v. Wade was overturned and abortion would slowly begin making itself illegal and unthinkable in the United States because of the courage and the compassion of activists just like you who have been doing this for decades and decades in America. In our country, since 1973, with the decision of Roe v. Wade, 63 million innocent children have lost their lives at the altar of the abortion industry. And when we zoom specifically in to Generation Z, our generation, 1/3 of us in America are not here, never got the opportunity to be here because of the devastating violence of the abortion industry. When you think about that 1/3 of us never got a chance to be a part of this amazing, sad, frustrating, happy, hopeful, tear-jerking experience called life, it can feel completely impossible to overcome. I mean, that's a tidal wave that I don't think anybody could wrap their head around. Think about the husbands and wives that will never have an opportunity to meet, the presidents and prime ministers and ambassadors and celebrities and artists and musicians that never got a chance to be with us here today. And I think so many people make the mistake around the world, especially in countries like yours, where abortion has become so unbelievably normal. Newsflash, you're really weird for being here, but you're weird in a good way. Counterculture is a good thing these days. But abortion is the normal standard in countries like yours here in Canada, and it can feel impossible to overcome that hurdle. But I'm here to share with you today that there is always absolutely reason to have hope, particularly hope for the pro-life movement here in your country. I walked around up on Parliament Hill this afternoon watching you all conclude your March for Life and had an opportunity to look at some signs and pictures and talk to some people, and was filled with this energizing sense of hope and inspiration that even in a time and place where against all odds, you have the opportunity to speak up and very little people are listening, you continue getting up anyway. You continue showing up anyway. You continue holding posters and posting things on social media and holding events just like this one anyway, and it is making an impact, whether you realize it on a grand scale or not. I discovered today that 41% of people in Canada, almost half, have not made up their minds on the issue of abortion in your country. They wouldn't consider themselves to be pro-life or pro-abortion, which is the biggest single reason to have hope of all time, particularly because young people, millennials and Generation Z, now make up about 40% of your country's population. 16 to 17-year-olds, anybody 16 or 17? Lots of you, I think, based on the horrible math in my mind that I'm not going to do because it all went out the window after OChem, let's be honest. 16 to 17-year-olds in Canada today use social media as their primary news source 52% of the time. In a time and a place where people, almost the majority, haven't made up their mind about one of the most important polarizing issues of the day, social media is perhaps the best possible tool that we all have access to make a dent in that percentage point. It's powerful to realize that your 15-second TikTok video or a live stream that you do from your dorm room or a silly post that you put on Instagram with a funny meme about something with abortion, although memes are dead. I have a whole different story for that another time during Q&A, but anything that you post on the internet has a far bigger impact and can reach a far larger audience and can change far more minds than any press conference Prime Minister Trudeau would hold or any international news coverage about this subject. That's a powerful reality, to know that one person with this thing that we all carry around every single day has the capacity to not just change one person's mind or one person's heart on the issue, how you might vote as a country and what the legal system for abortion might look in the future, but can change culture and bring us back to that nostalgic longing for a foundation of objective truth. So all of that to be said, we know that there's reason to have hope, even in the pits of despair and desperation that we have found ourselves in fighting against the all too powerful, seemingly invincible abortion lobby all over the world. So what specifically can we do about it? I think it really starts with being willing to embrace a few seconds of courage at a time, speaking up for truth in a world that is rejecting that very concept, rejecting the very concept of objective truth. That can look simple, like raising your hand in class and telling your teacher that she has absolutely no idea what she's talking about in high school biology. That could look like posting a courageous 15-second video explaining why you are pro-life on TikTok or as an Instagram reel. It could look like attending more events like this one or holding events like this one at your high school or university campuses, or even just having a conversation with a friend over a cup of coffee that you know is part of that 41% that has yet to make up their mind about this important issue, but doesn't know where to turn to find the right sources in the constant noise and chaos. Even more importantly than having the opportunity to do all of that, I believe we as Gen Z as you would say, all across the world, not only have that opportunity, but the obligation to do that. Because if we sit down and we shut up and we refuse to advocate for the most pressing human rights issue of our time, we will have nothing left to fight for by the time we are our parents' age or people after us have the opportunity to attend events like this one in the future. In the United States, there's a really common lie that circulates throughout young people in our high school classrooms and on our college campus and on our social media feeds that young people really don't have the opportunity to make a huge difference, and most of that stems all the way back to our country's founding as the first truly free country in the world that inspired the foundation of countless other free governments. I don't know if we could call ourselves that these days, but we believe this lie that our country's founding spurred a culture that silences and suppresses the voices of young, courageous, countercultural punk rock patriots standing for truth. And I always love to ask high schoolers and college students when I'm traveling across the country in America, speaking to them, to describe to me in a few words, and I'm sure you all could make the same guess, what the United States founding fathers looked like. Yell it out. Freemasons, not the answer I was looking for. There's a common answer in America. What is it? I don't know if I can hear you, I'm sorry. There's 3 words that we're looking for, and it's a really common mantra that we say all the time in America. White is one of them. Old and men. Old white men. Old white men were the foundation for liberty, for freedom, for democracy, and not just old white men, but like really evil old white men, right? And like geriatric, sagging at the seams, cannot stand up straight old white men. People that could never have possibly understood culture or sticking it to the man of the powerful government or being anti-establishment or fighting for liberty or just being culturally relevant in any capacity, way, shape, or form, right? And I think a lot of that lie in our country comes from the illustrations in our US history textbooks or the things that we see in statues in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. But in reality, that is a complete load of BS. It is an overt lie that old white men led the charge for liberty, not just to establish the United States. They led the charge for truth, not just to establish the United States. They led the charge for us to embrace our opportunity to fight for the change we want to see in culture, not just in the United States, but to inspire other governments around the world, from Canada to France to other countries in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and so many others. When our country was founded with the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, it was not old white men, geriatric, culturally out of tune, evil people that created the freest country the world has ever known. On that day, James Monroe, one of our founding fathers, was 18 years old. Aaron Burr, one of our other most important founding fathers, was 20. Before becoming the star of a smash hit Broadway musical, Alexander Hamilton, one of our most important founding fathers, was 21. James Madison was 25. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote our Declaration of Independence that inspired the founding documents of other countries all over the world, was only 33 years old on July 4th, 1776, which I know now seems really old, right? You're thinking 33, I'm a long ways off from that. Come back to me a few years after you graduate from university and it'll feel really, really close. But in a world and in a time that's dominated by 70 and 80-year-olds telling us that we don't know what we're talking about, or we lack the opportunity to speak up, or we need to sit down and wait our turn while they get to call all of the shots in promoting a pro-abortion culture. I want you to know that our world, our continent, but our world at large, has always relied on young people courageously speaking up against the most powerful forces in human history, like the British monarchy, a completely undefeatable entity at that time, to fight for objective truth, to fight for moral reality, to fight for something better than what they had before so that we could have the opportunity to do the same thing. And today, that comes to Gen Z, Gen Z, embracing that exact same call to action here in Canada and around the world, to speak up for truth, to advocate for preborn children that don't have a voice for themselves, to tell your teacher that she has absolutely no idea what she's talking about, or to fill your incredibly pro-abortion TikTok feeds with a countercultural narrative embracing people to change their mind when they need it the most. Most importantly, beyond all of that, I believe we also have a different call to action around the world as a generation. And it's not just to change people's minds or to run for office ourselves and try to change things politically from the inside out, but it's actually much more simple than that. I believe we have an opportunity and an obligation to live our lives in the peaceful quiet of truth, and to embrace a countercultural reality to what the angry and perpetually screaming and falling apart at the seams world seems to have to offer us. Zooming out at the 30,000-foot level, even beyond the issue of just fighting for life and combating the abortion lobby, I want you to think really seriously about what you want your life to look like in 10 years. For the youngest among you, that might be 26, that's how old I'll be this month. Or for the oldest among you, it might be a little bit older than that. And 10 years sounds so unbelievably far away, right? But it really does go faster every year, and it comes in the blink of an eye. Beyond who you want to vote for, beyond what political party you're registered to support, beyond what you're going to do specifically for this fight, how do you want to reject the lies of modern culture that is setting us up for failure and for heartbreak and for devastation, and show the world that there is a better way? Ironically, through embracing traditional values, which are anything but traditional these days, because being countercultural in the world today means being brave and courageous enough to fall in love, to get married really young. It's doable, trust me, there are good people out there. To have a lot of kids and be really proud of that in a world that's telling you, don't have kids, it'll destroy your corporate opportunities and it'll destroy the environment. You hate Earth if you wanted to have kids. Have a lot of them. Embrace your faith. In a world rejecting any worship of God and trying to get you to worship government or the God of self or your phone, be courageous and willing enough to embrace something different. Speak the truth, even if that truth shows up as hate speech. Again, I need to be really careful because your government is right down the road. But even if that truth shows up as hate speech, be willing to say it anyway. In a world where we're constantly ridiculed and mocked and called all kinds of horrible names under the sun for being willing to go against the grain of culture, it can be really tempting and easy and preferable to sit down and be quiet and put your head down and just go along with the crowd. But nobody, as I mentioned before, ever saw a possibility in the United States of America of something like what just happened to us less than a year ago, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Nobody ever saw coming that states across our country would find it in their courage and in their heart to make abortion illegal and unthinkable in the United States of America. Nobody ever saw it coming that we as a generation would see right through the absolute BS facade of COVID and think, you know, I don't think I want to do Zoom University anymore in America. Instead, I'm not going to pay $250,000 to get a degree in underwater lesbian basket weaving where I'm not going to have a job after I graduate. And instead, maybe I'll be an entrepreneur, which 62% of our generation in America is doing right at this very moment in starting our own businesses, not climbing a silly, stupid corporate ladder that always tells us we're too young to achieve anything great, but starting out the first day as a CEO. Nobody ever saw it coming that in religious communities in America today, Gen Z is embracing extreme tradition, not the watered-down, feel-good, beige Christianity that changes the gospel, like a megachurch in Nashville. Like a mega church in Nashville a few months ago that actually posted on Instagram that the Bible was not the Word of God. It's just a historical text that we can feel really good about reading and maybe live our lives according to it, but it's really just up to you, to the thousands of people in their congregation. But instead, Gen Z wants the Latin Mass. They want history. They want tradition. And we are not accepting anything less than that, even though these days in my own country, I'm labeled by our own government as a radical extremist for wanting the Latin Mass. So there you go. I'm sure things are very, very similar here in the same vein. It can be easy to go along with what the loudest voices want you to believe, want you to think, want you to say or do, or probably more prominently, not think or not do or not say in your communities. And I get it. It's scary. It is hard to be called a white supremacist and Hitler Youth Captain and Nazi Barbie. And we laugh about it now, but the first time I was ever called those things, or a woman hater or transphobic or homophobic, all because I said that a baby deserves our opportunity to be protected, the first time I was called those things, it sucked. I'll be completely transparent with you. I went home and cried for days thinking, how on earth could I ever have allowed someone to genuinely think that I live my life that way, or that I treat people that way, or that I lack that sort of compassion? It's hard to know that you might get your social media account deleted. You might get an F on a paper. Do you have Fs? I don't even know. F on a paper. Everybody does it differently. Fs on papers or in your class, failing grades. You might lose your job for advocating for the preborn or for objective truth. You might lose your safety for advocating for the preborn or for objective truth. I don't know how things are going to progress, but in the world of modern cancel culture, it's not as simple as somebody saying, I don't like what you had to say. I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. People will go out of their way to try to destroy your life. So when we're asking you to speak up for truth and to be countercultural and to go against the grain as a generation, I know what I'm asking you to do, and I know that that's very difficult. I've seen it. I've lived it. I do every single day. Just a few weeks ago, I was joined by the incredible Kristen Hawkins, who is the president of Students for Life of America, and you'd probably recognize her from your TikTok For You pages or your YouTube channels advocating for life in America on college campuses. And we traveled to Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I'd never been to Richmond. I used to live in Washington, D.C., about an hour and a half down the road, but really had no reason to suspect that an average college campus visit would yield anything but a handful of protesters outside who probably would refuse to come in because they don't really want to ask any questions about abortion. They don't really want to know about abortion. It makes them uncomfortable, and so they'll happily stand outside with a poster, but they won't come in. And Kristen and I had been traveling to college campuses all across the country for the spring semester, had very fruitful conversations and had invited people to come speak in the front of the line for our Q&A if they disagreed with anything that we said. We wanted that dialogue. We wanted to replace the polarization that was happening on this issue in America, and we'd had incredibly successful conversations along the way, from telling people that babies are not parasites. A child in the womb is not a parasite. That is a symbiotic relationship, actually. Or trying to reason why a cockroach had value, according to one young man, but a child in the womb did not have objective value. Or even just answering people's questions about what the procedure of abortion was. Because sadly, while it is in vogue and culturally acceptable to support this evil, vile industry, the vast majority of people who do don't know what they're talking about, and they've never been confronted with the horrifying reality of what the industry actually does. So I expected a handful of protesters, and that's about it. And we strolled up to Virginia Commonwealth University, and as our car was pulling into the parking lot, the first people that I see was a trio of protesters, all who had posters, and I assumed were going to go stand outside of our event, wearing black surgical masks, which I immediately thought, that's a little weird. Usually they're blue, but okay, I guess you all just wanted to match, and all black clothing. And a very clearly biological male was wearing a cheerleading skirt, like the varsity cheerleading skirts that you might recognize from sports events, that was unzipped on the side so you could see the floral undies peeking out from underneath, which was delightful. A crop top with a happy trail of hair going into the cheerleading skirt, and long braided hair and sunglasses. And Kristen leapt at the opportunity to go invite this person to come into our event. Our security guards said, maybe don't go invite that person to come to your event. But I was ecstatic to see them walk into the building and go into the classroom where we would be speaking. And they held Kristen and I in essentially a little green room for about 20, 30 minutes before our speech, all very normal, all very according to protocol. And right before our event, the student who was the chapter president of Students for Life on her campus at Virginia Commonwealth University came in and said, hey, there's a lot of people here who are not our people. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity for conversation. Let's just do a big Q&A right out front. You can do your speech afterwards, but there's a lot of people here I don't recognize, which is a great thing. And we were ecstatic until we showed up in the doorway, and it turns out the entire classroom had been commandeered by Antifa, who decided not to let us ever even have the opportunity to introduce our names before speaking, and instead began screaming and violently throwing punches while they chanted, "Fascists, F you, go home, we don't want Nazis on this campus, F pro-lifers, F babies, kill our babies," and several other slogans that still make my skin absolutely crawl. It got so bad, and the campus police department refused to show up to protect anybody associated with the event, that several people were injured in the process, and one student, the chapter president that I just mentioned, was actually physically assaulted by an Antifa activist that had nothing to do with the university, was not a student, but just wanted to go out of his way. I shouldn't say his, we don't want to assume, out of their way to destroy an opportunity for us to tell the truth. Courageously, she held the event again, and I had a prior commitment, so Kristen actually went back, and more arrests were made, and more insanity happened. But just a few days after that event, a friend and colleague of mine named Riley Gaines, who is a swimmer, former swimmer at the collegiate level in the United States, was also invited to give a speech about protecting women's rights at San Francisco State University, where she was similarly held in a classroom against her will for 3 hours and held to the ground by a biological male in a skirt and punched repeatedly because she dared to say that women were different from men and deserved to have protection. I know what I'm asking when I'm asking you to stand up and to be courageous and to speak truth. That's hard. It's a lot harder than losing a friend or getting an F on a paper or having one of your social media accounts deleted. But I want you to know this as I round things out, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. I know there's a QR code circulating, so if you have any questions, please drop them there. Before I am a pro-lifer, before I am an American, before I am a conservative, I am a Christian. And you may not be a Christian yourself, but I think that many of you probably are, likely are statistically, and even if you're not, I think these words are incredibly encouraging for you to be reminded of. We live in a time where we've watered down Christianity, which I believe is our call to share objective truth with the world, right? We believe truth has a name, and that name is Jesus Christ, and when we go out and speak the good truth, when we go out and speak the goodness and the truth of the Gospels and of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we know that that's not going to be easy, but I think we've forgotten that lately. At least in America, with our extremely watered down, feel-good cultural Christianity, I think we've bought into this lie that it's always going to feel really good to believe the truth and to share truth with the world. We're always going to have a pew to sit in on Sundays, and we're always going to have a huge group of friends, and it's never going to be very difficult for us because that's normal, right? Although today we know it's not normal, but especially our parents think that that is something normal in society. In reality, the gospel, what we believe to be truth about the universe, could not be more clear that the opposite is true. That we are not going to be absolutely adored, fanned over, have blue check marks and zillions of social media followers and never be censored on the internet. In reality, we're going to be hated. And that's the word that is used over and over and over again. John chapter 15 says, from the mouth of Jesus Christ himself, "If the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belonged to it, but you are no longer a part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you." It already does. It's not going to. It already does hate you. "Do you remember what I told you? A slave is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. And if they had listened to me, they would listen to you. They will do all this to you because of me, for they have rejected the one who sent me. They would not be guilty if I had not come and spoken to them, but now they have no excuse for their sin." Matthew chapter 10 says, "You will be hated by all," not just by some people, but all, "because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved." And earlier in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 5, we are reminded by Jesus Christ, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, because for your reward is great in heaven." It's not easy to stand for life, especially in a culture that has made abortion the bare minimum normal in society. It's not easy to believe that there is such thing as objective truth, to know that there is an actual standard for that. My truth is not different from your truth or your truth or your truth, but there is the truth worth fighting for. And it's certainly not easy to share that truth with the world and society around you. But in America, we have a saying in the culture war that we fight in all the time, which is such a silly word, but I think we all know that, right? We are fighting a culture war for the future of the soul of Western civilization. We like to say that Gen Z is Gen free, which doesn't really rhyme in Canada if I say Gen Z, so we'll keep our version, okay? But Gen Z is Gen free. And it's cute and it looks great on buttons and stickers and t-shirts, but I really believe that our generation is this generation that's breaking free from the cultural and societal constraints that are threatening to make us sit down and shut up and be silent about truth. We are embracing courage a few seconds at a time to bring truth back, to bring our society back to a nostalgic thing that we can recognize again on a solid foundation of what we know to be good and true and beautiful. We're doing that through raising our hand in our classrooms and hosting live streams on social media or posting TikTok videos, or even just talking to our friends about the big topics in life like abortion that most people probably assume the average teenager doesn't really care about. But you all are here right now. You are proving that to be wrong with each and every day in your activism and in your life. I believe that Gen Z has the opportunity to be a force for liberty, for freedom, and for truth in America and around the world. To a degree that nobody saw coming, and unlike anything we've ever experienced in human history. I recently turned in my book manuscript for my next book, and I can't believe I'm saying this. My publisher is going to be mad. I shouldn't be saying this out loud because it's not publicly announced yet. But I recently turned in my book manuscript, and the title of my next book is going to be The End of the Alphabet. I find absolutely no coincidence that our generation is at the end of the alphabet. They start over after us. But I also believe we're at the end of life as we know it. And looking around at the end of life as we know it, what is life as we know it? What is culture as we know it? Polyamory and a death of marriage and the family, removing faith so that we can worship God or worship the government instead of God, or worship ourselves instead of God, destroying freedom of speech or freedom of expression because we need to protect everyone from alleged hate speech. What is normal? What is life as we know it? Sacrificing 100,000 Canadian babies at the altar of abortion every year because they're inconvenient to us? I think the end of life as we know it is probably a really good thing. And we're the ones leading that charge at the end of the alphabet to reinstitute truth again, making sure that Gen Z around the world, not just in Canada or America, but every corner of the globe, can be Gen free, and so can everyone who comes after us too. Thank you.